So of course the entire skeletal system, it is placed into different divisions, or in two main divisions, which of course are the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. So in terms of parts that make up these two part of the skeleton, which of course would be the divisions, then definitely we need to actually know the different parts that make them up. So as for the axial skeleton, they are saying that it is made up of the ribs, the sternum, the spine, and the skull. So looking on the diagram where those parts are, as for the ribs, that is the ribs. As for the sternum, that is the bone at the middle, the center of the chest there. It is also known as the breastbone, and the spine is actually around the back there, the backbone. So those are the parts that make up the axial skeleton, and of course the skull, which person should know where the skull is located. Then we have what is called the appendicular skeleton, and as for the parts that make up the appendicular skeleton, definitely the upper limbs, so that include your arms, the lower limbs, that is your legs and your hip, and of course what is called the shoulder girdle, so right across the shoulder there. Then of course we would have gone through the functions of the skeletal system, which of course protection is one. And as for protection, persons should be able to give me examples of different parts of the body that will offer protection. And there you have the giving you an example where the skull and the rib cage have protective function. For example, the skull protect the brain. So you should be able to give example in terms of which body parts will offer that form of protection. Then we would have gone to support, that's the next function. So the vertebral column, which is the backbone, and the girdles mainly provide support. So they are saying that the vertebral column supports the body and head, while the girdles support the bones in the limbs. So that's the second function, support. Then we would have moved on to movement slash locomotion. So in order for us to move from point A to point B, or to move a part of the body, then it is the skeletal system that helps us. Production of blood cells, would have mentioned that the middle section of long bones, for example, those large long bones actually have a section, a hollow section that is called the bone marrow. So inside that bone marrow, that is where the blood cells are produced. For example, red blood cells, white blood cells, and of course platelets. Moving on, we would have moved on to another function, which is called provide a framework. So in terms of giving your body shape, it is your skeletal system that actually does that. Storage of minerals, so minerals such as phosphorus and calcium. So once we consume these minerals in large amount, or in more than the amount where we consume an excess, the human body don't want to waste it. So the human body try to find a way to actually store it. And that's where the skeletal system come into play again, where bones inside bones, that's where the calciums are and the phosphorus are normally stored. And the final function assists with breathing. So this have to do with the movement of the rib cage in terms of assisting with breathing. Would have then move on to tissues that make up the skeletal system, bones, and of course we have ligaments, and that's where we would have stopped at ligaments. So as for ligaments, at a particular joint where you have, let's say for example, the elbow joint, where the elbow joint is formed by three bones, because any part on the human skeletal system where you have a joint being formed, it normally formed by two or more bones, because one bone cannot form a joint, right? So in terms of keeping the bones in place at the joints, it is the ligaments that normally do that. So if there is no ligament, or if the ligament is damaged, then that joint will actually slip out. That simply means that the bones will not be able to stay in place. So ligaments are what keep bones in place at a joint. So once the ligament is damaged, then that joint will not be able to keep in place in terms of the bones. So the next tissue which we're going to actually look at now is called tendons. So this is a tissue of the human skeletal system. As for the function for tendons, the first pointer giving you the function where it is saying that it attach muscles to bones, and we have a diagram there where you have the red section represent the muscle. Down at the end of the muscles, you will realize that there is a white section. So those white section at the end of the muscles of the muscle, that is what is known as the tendon. So what they are saying is that in terms of muscles attaching to bone, it is not the muscle itself that will join or attach itself to the bone. It will actually be tendons. So tendons, their function is to attach muscle to bone. The second pointer, what tendons are made up of. So they are saying that they are made up of fibrous protein, collagen, and it is normally in what is called matrix. So that is what make it up. Tough. They are saying that tendons, they are normally tough, but they are non-elastic. And that is a difference between tendons and ligament, because ligaments, of course, they are elastic. So ligaments can offer some amount of stretch, but tendons, it is normally the total opposite, because if the muscles can actually extend, that means muscles can actually stretch. So there's no way you can have two things that actually stretch join into each other and expect them to allow movement. So what you have the muscle which can actually stretch, and it will actually join itself to the bone, so that when the muscle contract, then the bone can actually flex. Tendons must not stretch when muscle contracts to move the bone, and that is simple. Once the muscle contract to move the bone, if the tendon should actually stretch, then it's not going to allow any movement, because it's like the muscle contracting going to actually stretch the tendons. So instead of stretching the tendons, or the fact that the tendons are stretched, then that simply means that they will not be able to pull on the bone, simply because it is in that motion in terms of being stretching. So that is definitely why tendons don't have the capability of stretching, like for example ligaments. Alright, so muscle, that's the next one on the slide, but there is one that is called cartilage that is not on the slide. I'm gonna actually bring up another document so you can actually see the cartilage in terms of the notes that represent the cartilage. I'm gonna bring it up shortly. Alright, so in terms of cartilage, now at the ends of bones, or once you have a movable joint being formed, then there need to be cartilage at that joint. So looking at the diagram there, you will see the labeling. You have the two bones, one at the top and one at the bottom, and then you see the label, the blue section, that is cartilage. Now all these bones situated, now these bones, two bones actually form a joint there. Now while they are moving, then the ends of the bones might rub to each other. So if there's no cartilage, the ends of those bones will get damaged because there's nothing slippery to actually reduce the friction. Because once you rub two things together, then what is called friction actually start to take place, which simply mean that there will be an increase in temperature. So the more them are rub to each other, is the higher the temperature will get. So to prevent them from literally causing friction, which of course would lead to overheat or damage to the ends of bones, then the ends of the bones, they are actually covered with cartilage. So the cartilage, it is a flexible connective tissue with a smooth glassy appearance. So for those persons who actually eat chicken leg, you will realize that at the ends of the chicken leg there's normally a slippery and a white tish color bone that we call gristle. So that is actually cartilage. So rather, so the correct term for it is cartilage that you will actually see at the end of the bone from the chicken leg. So they are saying that the cartilage spreads the load to prevent shock between bones. Um, it actually forms a cushion like, so it should be it. So it forms a cushion like load spreading covering at body surfaces. So in terms of you walking at the knee joint there, the cartilage present in the knee joint basically reduce in terms of the vibration or the amount of load that is being spread over and the lower leg there, if we're using this to explain the lower leg in terms of the knee joint right there. Alright, so the fact that the cartilage, the fact that the notes is not in the and the PowerPoint, I'm gonna actually put it in the WhatsApp group so that persons can write it. So while you're writing the notes, as I would have said, the heading is actually tissues that make up the skeletal system. And the tissue are bones, which the note for bone is actually on the slide, ligaments, tendons, muscles, and of course cartilage. So it's just the notes for the cartilage. I'm gonna put that in the WhatsApp group as the PowerPoint that I've taken care of the other notes. Alright, so in terms of our muscles, so definitely this is another tissue that make up the human skeletal system. So when muscles are supplied with energy in the form of ATP, they contract. So the energy that is inside the human body that the muscle is gonna need, it actually in a format that is called ATP, and that stand for adenosine triphosphate. In other slides you will actually see what it actually mean in terms of adenosine triphosphate. So that is just the abbreviation ATP. So muscle tissue contains cells, and these cells normally contract to allow movement. So on the image that you're seeing there, it is actually just showing you an entire muscle. So the middle section, of course, that is the muscle itself, and to the ends you will realize, so one of the end it is labeled as tendons, and that is simply because in order for this muscle to attach to a bone, it's not just gonna attach like that, or not gonna attach by itself. So that's why the ends of muscles normally just branch off to a section to what is known as tendons, and this is what actually allow the muscle to connect to the bone itself. Alright, so as for the types of muscles, so we have different types of muscles that we need to be familiar with. So as for the types of muscles, we have one that is called voluntary muscle. So as the word voluntary muscle suggests, so they are saying but voluntary muscles normally attach to the bones of the skeleton. So the image that you're looking at now, where you're actually seeing this individual seems to be running, but you're realizing that you're literally seeing the muscles on his body. So that is simple because voluntary muscles normally cover the skeletal system. So, and the word voluntary mean that whenever these muscles contract, it is you decide that yes, these muscles gonna actually contract. So the muscles that make up your arms, the muscles that make up your legs, those muscles are basically voluntary muscles, simply because you will volunteer whether you want them to contract or not to allow any form of movement. This is called voluntary muscle because it contract when you wish it to. Right. So if somebody asks you to write some notes, then the muscles of your arms they don't work automatically. Um, they actually work based on the decision that you make. So if you decide that you're gonna write the notes, then you write the notes. So that's an example where voluntary muscles are actually at work. Then definitely we have a next type of muscle that is called involuntary. And rather than saying involuntary muscle, some textbooks will refer to it as smooth muscle. So that's just another term for it. So we have more than one term that we can use. So involuntary muscle, and we can use the term smooth muscle. Anyone you actually want to attach to it in terms of using it. So as for the involuntary muscle, there is a slight difference between it and the voluntary muscle. So they are saying that for the involuntary muscle, this muscle is under automatic control. So that simply means that whenever this muscle is contracting, it actually will do it automatically, meaning that you don't necessarily need to wait on the conscious part of the brain to actually do any contraction. So that is why they say that it works automatically. Because your body might be doing something or you might be doing something, but definitely you are not conscious of the fact that yes, you're actually doing it. So let's say for example somebody throws something towards your face or towards the eyes and you blink right away, then definitely the fact that you blink so quickly, that can be an automatic response to the object, because you don't get the chance to think about it because the reaction happens so fast where you actually blink your eye or close your eyes. So that is an example of involuntary action in terms of your involuntary muscle at work. Examples of this include the smooth circular muscle found in the walls of the intestines, which move food by peristalsis. So inside of the human body, they are saying that there are some muscles of the digestive system that will normally work. So the fact that these muscles are internal, definitely you cannot control them consciously, meaning that you cannot tell those muscles inside of your body not to work or not to beat in terms of causing some form of contraction there. And the final type of muscle, it is known as the cardiac muscle. So that's for cardiac muscle. It is only found in one part of the human body, and that is in the human heart. In the human heart only. So the three types of muscles, you have voluntary, you have involuntary, and basically this one is called the cardiac. So the cardiac muscle, they are saying that it behaves like an involuntary one, and that is simply because it is the muscles that make up the heart, and the heart never stop beat. So the heart work automatically. So the fact that the heart work automatically in terms of muscles and all of that, so that's why they said that cardiac muscle, um, it is termed under involuntary. It is located in the walls of the heart. Would have already said that. And next, the unique thing about the cardiac muscle, pointer number 3 is showing where it is saying that is very strong and resistance to fatigue. So resistance to fatigue means that yes, it will get fatigued, but not easily. So in a nutshell, fatigue means tired. So they are saying that not that the heart muscles will not get tired, but it basically take a long time for them to be tired. Very strong, because if this type of muscle never stop work, it work throughout life, then it need to be highly resilient in terms of the environment. So very strong and resistance to fatigue, as it must work constantly throughout life. So it's not like your heart can say, boy, I'm gonna rest. No, because these muscles, need to constantly be contracting so that blood can be pushed and filter around throughout the human body. So if this is not happening, then serious health issues. All right, so next concept, basically joints. So what is a joint? So a joint is formed whenever two or more different bones meet. So you have places on the human body where there are a lot of joints. So anywhere you have two bones or or more than two bones meet, then that is actually what is known as a joint. Now, as for joint, movement normally occurs in many different planes, and to make this possible, the bones must be joined to each other in different ways. So definitely you cannot have one bone forming a joint, as joints mean two different or more things joined together to form whatever they need to form. So we have types of joints. So we have two main types of joints. We have fixed joints, and we have a next one that is called synovial joints, or if you want to say movable joints. So once you're asked to put the joints under the two main types, so the two main types are fixed. That means that these joints don't allow movement at all. So that's why they are called fixed joints. Now the joints that make up the skull, that is an example of somewhere in the human body where you can find fixed joints. So the joints that make up the skull, they cannot move, simply because the brain is such a sensitive body part, so you can't allow it to actually move in terms of those joints that make up the skull. So as for fixed joints, they are saying are formed where bones are not meant to move. Right, so like the brain now, the bones that protect or surround the brain, then the brain is not meant for persons to actually go around. It is not meant for them to actually move. The sutures, the second pointer, the sutures of the skull, so that is the name given to the joints, that the immovable joints that make the skull. So the sutures of the skull is made up of several bones which fuse together in the early years of life. This is important so that the skull provides strong protection for the brain. So the next type of joint now is known as synovial joints, and synovial joints they are also called movable joints. So again, once you're looking at joints, just remember that joints is where you have two or more than two bones meet. So if you have two bones meet, then that is a joint, and if you have more than two bones meeting, then that is a joint. But you cannot have one bone and then you call that one bone a joint. So we're moving on to synovial joints, and these joints are normally called movable joints. That simply means that these joints they allow movement to take place. So they are saying that freely movable joints are called synovial joints. So once you decide to move that joint, once it actually move easy, move freely, then it is called synovial joint there. And the joint now have different features that allow so much movement to take place. All have the same basic structures. So every synovial joint, irrespective of where in the human body you can find it, in terms of the basic or the main component, the main things that make up one is what you will find in the others. So that's why they said that all have the same basic structures. Now, the ligaments hold the bones firmly together. So at that joint, as I would have said at the initial stage of the class, that the ligaments are what keep bones in their place. So the surface of the bones are covered with cartilage, and again I would have mentioned why surface of the bone need to be covered with cartilage, and that is simple to reduce friction and absorb what is called shocks. So the cartilage, they are saying that they are very smooth, and this fact that they are so smooth mean that they can reduce the friction and they can definitely absorb the shock. And shocks mean whenever you're walking and there's some amount of vibration, then you would want those to be definitely going towards the skeletal system. So the synovial membrane produce what is called the synovial fluid, right? So there's a part in the joint itself where you would have that is called the membrane, and that is what produce the fluid so that it can actually lubricate the joint. So synovial fluid serve as a lubricant which can help to reduce friction, because again once you have two different things rubbing against each other, then what is called friction can occur. So as for synovial joints, we have different kinds of synovial joints, which we're going to look into them individually. So again, in terms of joints, please remember that we have two main categories that we're looking at. And the two main categories in terms of joints are fixed joints and of course the synovial, or if you want to say the movable joints. So the first movable joints we're looking at is called a ball and socket joint. So the reason why it is called a ball and socket joint is simple because the two bones are the bones that form that joint. The end of one bone actually shaped like a ball, and the end of the other bone basically shaped like a socket. So hence they call the shoulder joint a ball and socket joint. And the good thing or the advantage of ball and socket joint is that they allow movement in all directions. So if you realize your arms, you can move it in any direction. So that's a good thing about ball and socket joint, as the joints allow what is called universal movement, or allow movement in one plane. So the last pointer there, the fitting of the humerus. So they are giving an example. So the humerus is that shoulder joint into the cavity of the scapula, and that is the shoulder blade, allow you to swing your arms. So definitely good example in terms of the shoulder there. Because if the joint at the shoulder there is not able to move accordingly, then it's going to be difficult to rotate the arm at that position. Then we have what is called the hinge joints. So allows movement in one plane only. So it open and close just like a door. At the as the knee and elbow joint. So the perfect example that they give you is actually at the knee joint. So definitely another part on the human body where you can find a hinge joint. It is actually your finger, so the middle joint in your finger, and you can also find it in your elbow, right? So those are examples on the place where you find hinge joint. Then after the hinge joint, we have a next type of joint that is called the gliding joint. And the gliding joint example is actually at the wrist, because if you realize you can slide your wrist right across, so move across. So it's called a gliding joint. Some textbooks are slidings. So these joints allow bone to glide over each other. And the second point that allows several angles of movement. And then of course they are saying thanks to gliding joint in the hand, bowlers are able to hold and spin the ball. In cricket, and batsman can grip the bat. Right, so as for that sports scenario, in terms of playing the ball or bowling the ball, then this joint need to be as flexible as it is. And of course you have the next type of joint that is called a pivot joint. So one bone normally stays stationary, that means that it don't move. And while you will have the other bone actually rotating, moving. Example, the neck and the definitely the head. So that's a perfect example for gliding joint. Not gliding, pivot joint I should say. Alright, so in terms of questions, alright, so check the screen. There are some questions. I'm gonna put up some questions on the screen here for you.